Sidak Atnakistan, Sidak Stephanie Carroll, Tishista, Slandak Nalchin. Hello, I'm Stephanie Carroll, and on behalf of the Indigenous Data Exchange, the Collaboratory for Indigenous Data Governance, the Indigenous Data Alliance, Indigitalab Network, the Indigenous Data Law Lab at NYU, and Local Context, welcome. I am joining you from the homelands of the Atha, also currently home to the Yaqui peoples in Tucson or Tucson, Arizona. We're excited to welcome Emily Santhanam and Corey Rowe for the Local Context TK and BC labels, Tools to Support Indigenous Cultural Authority and IDSov webinar. So this webinar is supported by the United States National Science Foundation funded Indigenous Data Exchange. The Indigenous Data Exchange, or IDX, leverages and supports existing Indigenous data sovereignty and governance networks' ongoing efforts to advance policy and practice and create and share tools for the governance of Indigenous data. Shanann, thank you for joining us today. We invite you to join our upcoming events. This Friday, we have the Sovereign Data Storage Tech Options Akwesasne Mohawk webinar with Marina Zafaris, Sierra Hicks, and myself. And then the U.S. Indigenous Data Sovereignty and Governance Summit, April 15th to 17th here in Tucson, or virtually. We will be recording this webinar, as I stated. Today, Riley Teitingfong and I will host. Our guests will each introduce themselves. If you have questions, please put them in the chat for our facilitated discussion at the end of the hour. You're also welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. We will send out any links that we share and the recording and resources via the Indigenous Data Alliance listserv after the webinar. A big thank you to our behind the scenes folks. So we have Andrew Martinez, Jewel Cummins, and Amy June Briesman helping out with chat and other items behind the scenes. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to my dear friend and colleague Riley Teitingfong to begin with our content. Riley?
Thank you, Steph. Buenas and hafa day, Manyanahus and Manyatluhu, Guahusi Riley, Taiting Fong. Hello, everyone. I'm Riley. I'm a co-director of the Indigenous Data Alliance with Steph, and I want to extend another big welcome to you. It's really great to see you all here. I'm very excited to welcome our longtime collaborators at Local Context for today's webinar, which is an introduction to the local context tools, which are designed to support Indigenous communities in upholding sovereignty and communicating cultural authority over their knowledges and data. So today, you'll get to learn about the local context, traditional knowledge, and biocultural labels, which are critical tools for contextualizing data and collections, communicating Indigenous provenance, community protocols, permissions and access, around access and use, and much more. You will also get to learn about the community-led processes through which these tools have been developed and can be customized, and you are invited to consider how they may be useful for your own communities and contexts. So again, Sainamase, or thank you for being here. And with that, I'll hand it over to Corey Rowe, Director of Programs with Local Contexts. And Emily will introduce herself when she takes the floor as well.
Thank you so much, Steph and Riley. Thanks so much to the Indigenous Data Exchange for having us. We're super excited to be here today to share about local contexts. We're going to plan to give about a 30-minute overview of local contexts, followed by plenty of time for your questions and discussion. Before I introduce myself and pass it over to Emily to introduce herself, we would like to begin with our own organizational land acknowledgement. So Local Context is an organization based across multiple countries, so this is our land acknowledgement. As an organization that transcends geographic and national boundaries, Local Context acknowledges that all of the lands and waters we may live on are Indigenous homelands. We recognize the ongoing significance of these lands and waters for Indigenous peoples in the past, present, and future. Our work is focused on addressing the ongoing legacy of settler colonialism and supporting a more equitable future. So we do a land acknowledgement to disrupt settler colonialism and recognize whose lands we're on and our responsibilities as guests here. And with that, I'll pass it over to Emily to introduce herself first.
Sure, thanks, Corey. Chukma, hi everyone. It's really great to be here with you all today. My name is Emily Santana. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Outreach Manager with Local Contexts. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation out of Oklahoma, and I'm calling in from the lands of the Red Willow people in Taos, New Mexico, so the southwestern region of the country. I'll pass it over to Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So my name is Corey Rowe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of programs with local contexts. I'm a settler on Wappinger and Paugussett homelands in so-called Connecticut. And I've been with local contexts for 5 years. My background is in museums, and how they came to be. So, with that, we're going to start with introducing our organization. I want to give a huge thanks and shout out to Amy June Briesman in the chat, who might be popping in with some links or help you answer any questions. So, thanks again, Amy June, for being here. So, just to start with introducing our organization and our origins over the past 2 decades, we're going to speak more about this in detail shortly, but just to give a brief overview, intellectual property law and colonialism have embedded challenges for Indigenous peoples' voices within, access to, and sovereignty over their own data and collections. The founders of Local Context heard this challenge from the communities they work with, who wanted a practical way to intervene and bring Indigenous authority and data sovereignty into spaces where they had been left out or removed. The traditional knowledge labels and biocultural labels were developed as a tool for exactly that since around 2010, and they've been developed in partnership with Indigenous communities around the world. In the last decade or so, we've also developed notices as a way for institutions and researchers that steward or generate Indigenous collections and data to support Indigenous data sovereignty and cultural authority. We started as a research project based out of universities in the so-called United States and in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But in 2022, we very excitingly became an independent nonprofit organization registered in the Navajo Nation. As part of that registration, we've established an Indigenous-led council as our governing body, which we are continuing to grow. So Emily's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so as you can see on the screen here, this is an image of our team, which is composed of our council and our staff. Our staff is about 10 people in total, and is comprised of a tech development and design team, an operations team, as well as the outreach team. As Corey mentioned, we are an international organization, so we're currently based across Turtle Island or North America and Aotearoa, New Zealand. So we're mostly connecting remotely over programs like this, but are occasionally able to connect in person for events, conferences, and training programs. So we wanted to give you an idea of the widespread interest and application of local context. So this map shows our global connections of communities, institutions, and researchers who are interested in or already using the local context system. So you might be able to tell that our connections are especially strong in North America and Oceania. As mentioned, that is where our team has been based so far. And we've largely been working in English, but are growing to support other languages as well as other geographical areas as our team is also able to grow. So I'll also briefly run through some of our common terms that you'll hear in this presentation, and what we mean when we say them and refer to them. So we use the term community as an international way to talk about nations, tribes, bands, confederations, and similar collective sovereign groups who have ancestral ties to the lands and natural resources where they live or from where they may have been displaced. We follow the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. So we recognize the sovereign right of Indigenous peoples to self-describe and to determine qualifications for membership and citizenship. The communities we work with could be represented by entities like tribal historic preservation offices or TIPOs, cultural centers, language or conservation departments, tribal archives, libraries, museums, and more. Now, when we use the term institution, we're referring to organizations that do not have Indigenous governance and that have or generate Indigenous data or collections. When we refer to researchers, we're referring to individuals who are conducting research or generating data. Researchers, of course, may be Indigenous individuals, but are not representing a community necessarily. And I'll pass it back over to Corey to talk about some of the challenges in data and information systems.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So now to go into more detail, Indigenous data and collections are held in libraries, museums, archives, research centers, and many other types of institutions around the world. These materials are the product of the ongoing colonial project. They can be historical and contemporary. But because of that colonial context and that legacy of how many of those materials were collected, significant information is often missing. So this could be information like community names that could have been excluded, not considered important, or misrecorded. This misinformation and misattribution continues to affect communities' ability to find their information and collections and knowledge and to reassert their control. Because of the way that intellectual property operates, communities are also largely not the legal rights holders, which leads to a lack of control and governance. This is really an issue of sovereignty. It's especially concerning as some Indigenous knowledge and collections are not open or meant to be accessed by anyone at any time. Add to this that there's more researchers working with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous data than ever before. There can be an extractive or reductive research paradigm in place. And in this era of big and open data and AI, these mistakes and omissions are replicated into the digital forms of the material. So with this combination of issues, the Indigenous communities that our founders work with were looking for a practical way to intervene and to interrupt these systems. So from this need, the labels were developed over about 10 years in partnership with various communities. Later, the notices were also created. The labels and notices are digital labeling tools. They are markers of Indigenous rights, interests, and cultural authority that can be used in a variety of contexts. They're educational. They're not tied to who, quote unquote, owns the material, because for historical and many contemporary materials, this is often not Indigenous communities. The labels and notices are practical mechanisms for implementing the CARE principles for Indigenous data governance and regional Indigenous data sovereignty principles. They also connect Indigenous authority, provenance, and protocols to Indigenous data. We've seen them used digitally in collections catalog, archival records, apps, websites, course syllabus, and more. And we've also seen a few uses outside the digital, and we're going to show you some of those today. So we're going to focus today on our tools for Indigenous communities, which are the labels on the left. The tools for institutions and researchers are the notices, which are on the right. We're not really going to focus on those today, given the intended audience. So I'll pass it over to you, Emily, to talk about the labels.
Sure. So, as Corey mentioned, the local context labels were really designed to support Indigenous communities in reinserting their cultural authority and sovereignty into spaces. Communities could use these labels to clearly state the provenance, protocols, and permissions of materials and belongings, and they're a way to keep Indigenous rights and interests with collections and data. Really, the goal behind the labels is to support that basic acknowledgement and attribution to disrupt settler systems. But they also move towards supporting Indigenous authorship, access, authority, and sovereignty, as well as institutional accountability. The labels can help to correct records, they can bring Indigenous rights and interests back into institutional contexts, and they can serve to re-educate non-Indigenous people about Indigenous roles and responsibilities for sharing knowledge and data. And back over to Corey to introduce a video clip.
Yeah, so next we're going to have a couple different clips from our introductory short film to hear directly from community members in their own words on the potential impact that the labels can have. So in this clip, you're not always going to see their name tag, so just to name their names, you'll see Local Context co-founder and strategic advisor Jane Anderson, Passamaquoddy Tipo Donald Soktoma, Passamaquoddy Tribe translator and advisor Dwayne Toma, and Local Context strategic advisor Maui Hudson of the Whakatohea Nation. So this is just a 2-minute clip from our intro film, so we'll play that.
The Passamaquoddy wax cylinder recordings were made in Calais, Maine in March 1890.
These are songs from our ancestors that haven't been heard for 120, 130 years.
As a matter of fact, the first time I actually listened to the wax cylinders, it really, I was very, very emotional.
These songs were sitting in an archive waiting for us. And the right moment that they came was the right moment that we needed them. Yoneha, 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 Yoneha. It helps us to take possession of that song back instead of somebody interpreting what that song is and what it means. One of the most powerful things that we've experienced as a community is gifts coming back from our ancestors.
If we think about the traditional knowledge that's being shared as a gift and what the essence of that is and how that's maintained, and then the sorts of protocols that can be used to ensure that it's used in the right sort of way, that's what we see the labels sort of helping us do.
We are still here. It's amazing.
Okay, so apologies for the lag. I really encourage you to watch the films on our website for free, to see them in beautiful high quality and with the sound synced. We have a couple short films that is from our introductory film, and we'll talk more about those in a little bit. But to get into the specifics of how the labels are used, we have this collage here of some of their uses around the world. So the labels were designed to be flexible. They could be applied to a website or a collections database, or more specifically on a single item of cultural heritage or a data set. So when the labels are added to materials, they become a visible indicator to anyone who's accessing that material to understand its ongoing significance. Here's just a few uses of the label. So we'll go into a few others in depth shortly, but just to give you an idea, clockwise from the top left, we have Terora and Iwi Mari, which added a label to a master's thesis research. Next over, we have from Whakatohia, another Iwi Mari. They've included labels in a phone app. Ngāti Maru, another iwi. They've used a label within a biodiversity database, and that's actually below to the left. On the top right is from Puka Puka, which is a Cook Island community. They've added a label to an oral history recording. The Slamin in the middle on the bottom there is a First Nation, so-called Canada. They've added labels within a digital publication. And then on the bottom right, from the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohegans, a nation in the so-called United States, they've added labels within their medicine garden and related exhibition materials. So with that, I'll pass it over to Emily to talk more about the labels themselves.
Perfect. Yeah, so we have 20 traditional knowledge, or TK labels, which are for use on cultural heritage materials. The TK labels really identify cultural material that has community-specific conditions regarding access and use. On the right, in the green, you can see the 10 biocultural, or BC labels, which were developed to support community expectations for biocultural collections and data. The BC labels are to support Indigenous peoples' right to decide how collections and data that come from their lands and waters are used. Now, each of the labels has a different purpose, which we'll look at briefly in a second. But the labels' meanings are related to three main categories of provenance, protocols, and permissions. And we'll get into those a little bit deeper here. So at the top, we have our provenance label. Provenance labels are related to where something comes from or who may have responsibility over materials. So this could include attribution of nations, clans, or families in relation to materials. The example we have here of one of our provenance labels is the TK Multiple Communities label. So a community could use this label if there are multiple communities who have responsibilities of custodianship or stewardship or ownership over specific material. So, for example, the 4 Wabanaki nations in Maine, here in the United States, have each customized this label for use on research projects that are taking place across multiple nations' homelands. Beneath the provenance labels, we have protocol. Protocol labels are related to protocols that determine how material should be accessed and by whom. So this could be related to gendered material or maybe other sensitive materials. Our example of a protocol label here is the TK seasonal label. This label is all about connecting knowledge and land, and a community might use this label if there are seasonal associations with material or data. So, for example, a community could use this label to make clear that certain songs or stories are only meant to be told at a particular time of year. Next, we have permission labels, and they're related to how materials should be used into the future as determined by the community. The example of the permission label that we have here is the BC non-commercial label. So a community could use this label if they would like material or data to only be used for non-commercial purposes. Now, just wanted to note that with this last label, there is both a TK and BC version, and there's also a TK and BC open to commercialization label, so the community can indicate whether or not they're interested in potential commercialization related to given material. So we've seen the use of the BC open to commercialization label by the Iwi Maori Whakatohea on biodiversity samples that were collected from their homelands. And Corey's going to get a little bit deeper into the parts of the label.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So every community can create their own set of labels. Each of the labels comes with template text, but to further support community sovereignty, they have the option to customize each of their labels. We're looking here at the traditional knowledge attribution label. This label is about names and putting proper attribution back into records. This is often one of the first labels a community will use. That's perhaps our most widely utilized label. So we'll review the main parts of the label. So there's the icon. This does not change. It's not editable. We've decided to keep the iconography constant because our labels are used around the world, and this standardization is useful for recognition purposes. On the right, we have the title and the description. The title is TK attribution in this instance. This is the standard title name, which can be used in addition to the community's name for the label, which is often a translation of that title into their own language or languages. The description here is the template text for the TK attribution label. Communities can use this text as is. They could insert their name where appropriate, and they can also write their own version of this description. A community has the right and the power to decide what to include in a label's description. This is an expression of sovereignty. It's adding specificity and local conditions and meanings around the idea of the label. Finally, not pictured here, but there's also a unique identifier attached to each label that is customized. This is generated in the Local Context Hub website, and this allows for machine readability. We're not going to talk too much about the hub today, but it's a website that supports the customization and application of the labels. And now Emily's going to kick us off with an example of how label customization has looked like for particular communities.
Yeah, so we're starting by sharing labels from the Skowlets Band of the Stolo First Nation, located in what is today known as British Columbia. So what you're seeing here is a screenshot of the homepage of their website. And if you look at the top right corner, you can see the label icons. Now, if you clicked into those label icons, it would show the full label text. Now, for the purposes of comparison, we have the Skowlets label on the left next to the label template text on the right. So as you can see, the Skowlets are using the traditional knowledge attribution label icon, but they've titled the label in their own language, Hulkamelam. They've also customized the label text to explain what this label means to them, which is about telling their story in their own words. So by using this label on their website, the Skowlets are labeling the information and stories that are shared here as their true knowledge and history, and they're asking viewers to use this in a respectful way and to attribute the Skowlets. Corey has our next example.
Yeah, so we also wanted to show the use of a community's labels on institutional websites and repositories. This is the focus of our short film that we shared a clip from earlier. So here we're looking at the screenshot of a page in the Library of Congress's online catalog. This is an entry for a recording of Passamaquoddy songs and stories made in what is today known as Maine in the 1890s. You can see on the right side, three labels have been applied by the Passamaquoddy on this record. The Passamaquoddy really felt comfortable sharing this cultural information to be added to the Library of Congress record because they were able to apply their labels. Now, to look more closely at what those labels actually are, we have the TK attribution label. So with this label, the tribe is asking for the correct attribution wherever the recording is referenced, which could be attributing to the Passamaquoddy tribe or individual Passamaquoddy names. The next label that we have here is the traditional knowledge outreach label. So by using this label, the tribe is signifying that they're sharing this information for educational purposes around Passamaquoddy culture and worldviews. The last label that we have here is the traditional knowledge non-commercial. By using this label, the tribe is making clear that they would like this material to not be used for commercial purposes by non-Passamaquoddy people. The application of labels in this instance was a years-long effort, and it resulted in changing the Library of Congress's digital infrastructure to allow for any tribe or nation to apply labels to materials in the future. This is obviously a huge change, and very grateful to the Passamaquoddy tribe and elders who contributed to this effort. The application of labels also led to Harvard, which had a tenuous claim on the rights for the recording, to relinquish that claim. So this work is changing how rights are recognized at National Collection, and another instance of which Emily will talk about next.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. So this is another instance of labels being applied by communities on materials that are circulating outside of their community. So Manaki Whenua Landcare Research is a Crown research institution in Aotearoa, New Zealand. They have biological collections of national significance and at a very large scale, represented by over 700,000 digitized specimen records, which are available on their online database. Now, most of these samples are geolocated, and so they're able to identify, for example, the 1,400 specimens that were collected from the Rohe lands of Te Whakatohia, who have then applied four of their labels: the BC Provenance, BC Research Use, BC Open to Collaboration, and BC Open to Commercialization labels. With the BC Provenance label, Whakatohia are marking the specimen's provenance as being within their area of interest. With BC Research Use, they're using this label to verify that Whakatohia have permissioned the use of these biocultural materials and data, including the DSI, for research purposes. With BC Open to Commercialization, they're stating that with this label, they're open to commercialization opportunities and that they do assert their rights to participate in discussions of commercialization of this taonga. And finally, with BC Open to Collaboration, they're signaling that they're open to and interested in potential collaborations around this particular specimen. Now back to Corey to share a different example.
Yeah, so Te Whakatohia, which is the iwi that Emily just talked about, have also applied labels in a phone app. So the labels have been applied to Waiata, which are songs or chants within this app that the iwi developed, and you can see a couple screenshots here. You can download this app from the App Store and Google Play. iwi members living on their homelands or abroad are able to log into the app and see more songs, but there are three that are publicly available. So the labels are guiding the use of these waiata by both iwi members and non-members. They help define how these waiata should or should not be shared and how they should be attributed. So, for example, the label on the right for this particular waiata is the traditional knowledge verified. Whakatohia have added this label to mark that the song and information are being marked as true and correct and coming from Te Whakatohia. Pass it back to you, Emily.
Great, thanks. So yeah, this next example shows labels applied by a community on a collaborative project that's housed on an institutional partner's homepage. The Pueblo Quechua de Sariacu of Ecuador are working in partnership with the More Than Human Life, or MOTH program out of NYU Law, with the Fungi Foundation, an organization dedicated to the protection of fungi, and with SPUN, a scientific organization uncovering and sharing the importance of the underground fungal world. So, through the Science Across Cultures initiatives, Sariaku scientists and partners documented the fungal life and soundscapes in their territory, with the ultimate goal of using their research as evidence to legally and politically protect their territory, their rights over it, as well as the rights of the living forest. To protect Sariaku sovereignty over their knowledge and data generated through this effort, Sariaku community members have customized 12 labels total, and they've applied 4 of those labels to this project website, which you can see on the right. The TK attribution, TK culturally sensitive, TK verified, and BC provenance. With the TK culturally sensitive label, for example, they're indicating that according to the traditional knowledge of the Quechua indigenous people of Sariaku, their protectors, nature, and territory, their relationships with mushrooms are part of the ancestral knowledge. The Quechua indigenous peoples of Sariaku, their protective beings, nature, and territory determine that all relationships that are established with the mushrooms and their territory must be respectful of all beings that inhabit the living forest. And I believe Corey's going to share our last example.
Yes, so this is from the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans. As we've talked about today, labels were initially started as digital markers, but communities have used them in creative ways outside of that context as well. So here the labels are being used in a medicinal plant garden, including physical and digital exhibition publications in so-called Stockbridge, Massachusetts. This was a Native Nation-led project with the support of the trustees of reservations, who are the owners of the Stockbridge Mission House, where the garden and additional spaces on the property are designated for the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans to use for public education and outreach. The applications of labels in this space are functioning as a signal to orient visitors in receiving and transmitting the knowledge and values of Mohican biocultural and traditional knowledge during and after their visit to the medicine garden. The labels that are being used here are the Biocultural Verified label, since exhibit text was selected and written by community members with active relationships with medicinal plants. The BC Outreach label, as the majority of the information presented here can also be found in text written and published by Mohican authors with backing from their native nation. And the BC Non-Commercial, to communicate Mohican values and protocols that govern their medicinal sciences and their reciprocal relationship with the plants that they study and form connections with. The non-commercial label also assists Mohican cultural keepers in communicating broader values and ethics around health and healing, which require maintaining respect for creation and its right to thrive. So with that, we just wanted to end with some next moves. If you're interested in this work, some suggestions for getting started. So Emily, I'll pass it to you first.
Sure, yeah. So if you're not already connected through our working groups and networks, we really encourage you to check those out. We have a number of peer working groups, which are international communities of practice. For those in this call, the Indigenous Communities Working Group could be a really great fit to chat through your use case and hear how other communities have used labels. And we also have regional networks, so groups for specific geographic areas around the world. Really encourage you to connect in spaces where you have affinity. If you're also interested in learning a little bit more, we do have a comic which was created in collaboration with the Shinnecock Nation and New York Botanical Gardens. So it's a really lovely piece. You can learn a little bit more about local context in a really understandable and easy to digest way. And over to Corey to talk about our films.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So, as we've mentioned today, we do have a couple of short films. The two that we're highlighting here were made with the Penobscot Nation, and A Connection Remains was made with Sakatohia. So we really encourage you to watch them. They're under 30 minutes each, and they're available for free on our website. They're also captioned in both English and Spanish. And then finally, if you're interested in the Hub, which is again our website for customizing and applying labels as well as notices, we do have a series of tutorial videos available on YouTube. You're also welcome to join the Hub, and we also have a Sandbox Hub if you're interested in just checking it out and seeing what it's like. Emily.
Yeah, I think with that, we just wanted to open up for questions, discussion, and any of your thoughts or ideas around this work. So thank you so much for joining our presentation, and we'll pass it over to the audience.
I can jump in to say that we did get a few come through the chat that we didn't get a chance to answer in the chat. So the next one that I see is from Kusla Kusla. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
I don't know why Zoom put it up with two Kuslas. It's just one of me, and my niece
Okay,
has the same name. But do you want me to?
great. Do you want to say your question?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. First, thanks for hosting this. I guess we're from a unfederally recognized tribe. I from two tribes, but the one that I'm here working with is the Yaktichu Tichu Yaktilhini folks from the San Luis Obispo area in California, and there's a lot of history of anthropological use of our traditional knowledge and culture down here, which is already out of our control, right? Like, so I can see how the Library of Congress labelings would be really helpful, in partnership working with those folks. But there's also a lot of folks that may see some of our pictographs and copy them benignly for tattoos. I mean, benign in the sense that like they're not making money off of it, but then also other folks who do want to make money off of it. And so I'm wondering to what extent the kind of non-commercial use labels are actually a kind of copyright or some kind of, claim on those symbols in a legal context, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to start that off. Thanks so much for that question. It's unfortunately not a unique story that we hear. So the labels exist outside of a legal framework because that framework was not built to support Indigenous knowledge. Um, and so they exist as a educational marker. Um, that obviously can work in tandem with legal protections. So we recommend in general, if you're able to have legal protections alongside the use of the labels, if you're able to use Creative Commons alongside the use of the labels, those just strengthen the protection that's available for this important knowledge. Emily, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was great. I think that summed it up. Yeah, the tools that we created are meant to operate outside of legal frameworks. But as Corey said, they're really designed to kind of work alongside other kinds of protections. So, apologies that this is maybe not as clear cut of an answer as would maybe help your use case. But yeah, we've seen instances where kind of using multiple tools alongside each other have been useful.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we'll pass it over to the hosts if you want to facilitate the questions. So appreciate that.
Hi, everybody. Well, thank you for that fantastic webinar. I do want to just make sure everybody's noticed the links that Amy June has been popping into the chat. And then I wanted to know if anybody who has put a question into the chat wanted to speak up and ask their question. Otherwise, I will begin reading through the questions, and Riley will probably assist me.
I could ask mine. Hi, thank you so much. That was
Yeah.
great. So I have worked a little bit with labels in the past, on an archive of bird knowledge out of Oxford University, and we were using the sort of each Indigenous interlocutor we were asking them to choose and work with us on choosing which ones to use and what kind of text to go with them. So it's before the hubs and spokes piece, and now it's been a while since I had been engaging that work, but getting back into it, I'm wondering. It seems now that that creating labels now should really be based out of an institution. Like the people making them should have control over them as a spoke. Is that right? And I don't know if I'm articulating this right, but I guess my question is sort of because I work with 3 or 4 different groups that really don't have infrastructure to be controlling. They don't have a site or a decision-making group that would control the creation. It's sort of done more one-on-one and then approved in community. Just wondering sort of what the next step would be as to working with those now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So great question. I think maybe just a point of clarification as well is local context does have this relationship with the Mukatu CMS, which I think might be that kind of spoke model that you're speaking about.
That's what I've worked with. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So Mukatu is a collections management system that has the labels built into it. And it's a very community-centered platform for those of you who aren't familiar. Local Context, one of our co-founders is also the founder of Mukatu. So we do have a relationship and a history there, but we are separate entities. And so as our organization has developed more and become our own organization, we've been able to establish this hub website where all customization of labels does now take place with the next Mukatu update that will also be included as part of that process as well. As far as community processes, I wonder, Emily, if you would like to talk a little bit about what that looks like, that it can look very different for every community, and we look to communities for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, as we mentioned at sort of the middle top portion of the call here, we really allow community to define themselves. So there doesn't necessarily need to be federal recognition, doesn't necessarily need to be state recognition. We really just look to the communities to define themselves as a sovereign collective group. When it comes to engaging in the hub, we also understand that not all communities maybe have the same form of access to technology, internet connectivity, digital literacy. There's, a whole host of different kind of challenges that communities may be facing. So we do also have offline opportunities for communities to engage in the hub, to customize their labels, to sort of elect a liaison to do that kind of like digital infrastructure work on their behalf. So there's multiple ways in which communities can kind of connect with us. It doesn't necessarily need to be specifically within the confines of the hub. We do have sort of printable, downloadable label customization packets that we've seen be really helpful for communities who are kind of doing this work as a collective when they're meeting together in person, and then sort of electing that liaison to do that work on the hub side of things.
Okay, that's clarifying. Thank you so much. I'll look
Of course.
into those.
Also, just wanted to note, we're always more than happy to meet communities where they're at, to chat with them on the phone, video calls, email, whatever way they would maybe like to learn a little bit more about the labels and figure out what way works best for them for getting connected with us.
Great, thank you.
Great question. Thanks, everybody. Carly, I'm wondering if you want to ask your question from the chat or if you want me to read it out.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so I work for a regionally federally recognized tribe, and we've started to kind of work with different federal agencies on some co-stewardship programs and projects. I'm just wondering if there are any success stories on, drafting, say, like a formalized MOU or like a data sharing agreement. Um, I think one of the things that we keep hearing is like we just don't have the capacity to integrate this right now. We don't understand it. We haven't heard about this being used elsewhere. I really appreciated like the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohicans. Like, I saw like some of the interpretive like signage, and it had, the plant medicines and their website, and they integrated that. But was that on tribal lands? I'm just trying to figure out if there are any success stories with federal agencies, and I just would love to, integrate the labels into our data workflows as we develop them. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I'm happy to start off our answer. I would say it's a little bit of a mixed bag, especially at the moment. We are having some conversations with certain federal agencies or state agencies. Um, I would say the most success that we've seen is with the Dagaga Bimuk contact station at the National Park Center in Maine, Katahdin Woods and Waters, which worked with the Wabanaki Nations. I believe there was an MOU as part of that process because there was Indigenous intellectual property and cultural knowledge that was shared as part of that process. There is an event next week in New York. I don't know if you're nearby. We'll drop the link in the chat. That's going to talk about that project. But I would say there has been some successes. There's also been the Sweetgrass cultural protocol that was developed for use with the National Park Service. But yes, it's a little depends on the agency. We're always happy to have a conversation with you about what you're thinking. But Emily, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was thinking also in terms of kind of state organizations. The Maine State Archives has been the first archive within a state to incorporate notices within their system. They use archive space, so I think that's one instance where we've seen uptake and success in collaboration within state archives in particular. That's just one thing that also came to mind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carly, for that question. I think next we'll go over to Jackie Cordova's question, and I think I'll read it out for her. She said her Wi-Fi is unstable, but Jackie, feel free to add or modify in the chat. So Jackie was wondering, how does local context navigate the commercialization label as far as use by various users? For instance, if a tribal nation wants to use the commercialization label and the rights that are connected to them as a sovereign nation, versus a community wanting to use the commercialization icon as being part of a nation, but not the legal entity of the nation.
Yeah, great question, Jackie. Thanks as always for that. So I would say your question gets at a couple different points, and maybe I'll just start with the kind of commercialization label itself. So the open to commercialization label is really about opening a conversation and opportunity for a tribe or nation to be involved in potential commercialization processes. It's not a like, go ahead, please commercialize this. It's really creating space for that conversation between any interested parties in that tribe or nation. But I wonder, Emily, if you'd like to talk more about kind of our approach. I know you've talked a little bit about the kind of community process for using the labels, but maybe you could just talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I will say in terms of sort of a particular like department or part of a community that wants to engage in the hub, we have seen that take place in the hub. I think, as mentioned, in terms of the different kinds of communities that we've worked with within the hub who customize and apply labels, that does include, different tribal historic preservation departments, archives, maybe a tribal cultural center or library. So we really want to encourage community members to kind of think about the different ways in which a community may want to engage in the hub. I would also say that we really encouraged, multi-vocality when it comes to the hub. So multiple folks who are part of a community taking place in the customization process. In fact, within the customization process in the hub, we did design it to be at least two people, one who would kind of initiate the customization, somebody else to kind of continue the revision process and approve it, really just to ensure that these decisions are being made collectively and in community. So I hope that answers a bit of your question, but let us know if we can help clarify.
Is there anyone else in the audience that has a question for Corey or Emily or Amy June? Jackie.
Sorry, guys. I just got better Wi-Fi. I just wanted to say thank you so much for answering that question. And I have a kind of a follow-up one. It's kind of unrelated, but related. I'm wondering if so I work with an organization and our board is all Oglala Lakota elders. And I'm the tech person and I do the computer stuff. And I do the data stuff. And I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of like, is there a way that I can go into the hub and kind of see what the feeling is like and how it works before I almost like a test drive before I take it to the board to say, hey, this is what this is what it can do, stuff like that. I see you nodding your head, Corey, so I'll stop talking. I'll just let you
Yes.
explain.
No,
Thank you.
absolutely. That's definitely something that we've thought about. So there's a whole separate sandbox hub that you can try all of this out. I would also say we've really tried to build the hub in a way that accommodates different communities' processes and internal governance. So if that means that you, Jackie, are appointed as a liaison, that is something that we would ask for documentation for, but that is completely fine for the use of the hub. So we have different resources around this, but we've really tried to make it flexible and accommodating while also respecting that community authority piece. Emily, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I think we can pop the link to the sandbox in the chat, but it's almost like you teed that up for us. Really glad to be sharing that resource out.
Thank you guys so much. That is super helpful.
Thanks, Jackie, for that tee up there. Anyone else have a final question before we close up? Great. Well, this has been a fantastic webinar. Cheyenne, thank you to Emily, Corey, Amy June, Riley, our behind the scenes folks, and to everyone for attending. Again, on this Friday, we welcome you to join the Sovereign Data Storage Tech Options Akwesasne Mohawk webinar. We also invite you to join the U.S. Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network's 2026 IDSov Summit in person in Tucson or virtually. Until next time, thanks so much.